and welcome to Sustain, the podcast where we talk about sustaining open source for the long haul. Who are we? Where are we going? Where did we come from? Should I still ask that if I'm asking it from a South Pacific island that has a long, troubled history of colonization? Interesting questions. Very excited to talk today with our guest about other things like open source software and not colonialization. And I'm going to introduce our guest in a second. Before I do that, I want you all to know who is on this podcast. It's just me, again, solo hosting, mainly because New Zealand is the wrong side of the world. So I am Richard Littauer, your host. And I am joined today by Chelsea Finnie. Chelsea is an awesome person. They ran PythonNZ for the last year, and I believe are currently also the chairperson. Again, running PythonNZ, which is the structure, the group, the community for Pythonistas here in Aotearoa. We've had a few people on before from this side of the world, and we will get back to academic stuff elsewhere from other sides. But for now, I wanted to talk to Chelsea because they have an interesting perspective on what's been happening over the past few years. They work for REANNZ, which is one of the major, well, I'll let them introduce it, but they're a Pythonista there. And they also live in Whanganui-a-Tara, Pōneke, Wellington, New Zealand, calling in from the center of town, which is like 20 minutes from where I am. Chelsea, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. I just gave a teaser. You work for REANNZ. Tell me what it is and what you do there.
So REANNZ stands for Research and Education Advanced Network New Zealand. It is the National Research and Education Network for New Zealand, providing network services for research institutes, universities, other things. Additionally, we also recently combined with NESI, which is a high-performance compute. There's collaboration from the universities and organizations. So they're part of us. So we're providing those high-performance compute services to research organizations as well. What do I actually do there?
Yeah.
My current job title is a senior network DevOps engineer. I would probably say that my job is, yes, I do stuff. Like I do things. I was originally hired there to do network automation. There was some network automation systems that we had written in Python that my boss built. And I was brought on board to understand that system, take the risk away from just him understanding it, and also creating tools, new things to automate our network. That has progressed on to what we're doing with a network automation now, which is called PANDA, Program Advancing Network Device Automation, where we're actually defining network services and then pushing them down out to the network. Now, this is at very early stages, but it's a very exciting initiative that we've got.
So it seems like a standard IT DevOps type job. Where do you touch open source as part of that job?
I have contributed open source. One of the things that I've done is this Argus Glue service. So Argus is this it's like an incident management system built by another NREN, or at least something that has an NREN SICT, I think. They're in Norway. And pretty much it's this alert management system, incident management, where alert comes through and you can like acknowledge it, close it and stuff. I've built a Glue service that connects Alert Manager from Prometheus to Argus using basically just Flask as a webhook. And that's actually open source. That's out, used by other organizations. It's there online. I could probably provide a link to it somewhere in the things if people are curious.
That'll be in the show notes online at podcast@thesaintoss.org. Yeah. Chelsea, that sounds like a fun project. It also sounds fairly niche. Doesn't sound like people are clamoring to work on it because the people who are doing that are just going to be industry people.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I know from experience that you define yourself as an open source community type person. How did you first get involved with PythonNZ and why?
So I should probably go back a bit of how I got involved into open source communities, right? And we can probably go a little bit further back of how I got involved into Python in the first place. But we'll take a fun journey around the place. So back in, what was it, 2018, 2019? Well, it was one of those years. I got a job at Catalyst as a Linux desktop support person. Now, Catalyst in New Zealand, don't know what their official name is. There's multiple different Catalysts, and this is the IT company, IT services one. They pride themselves on open source technologies. They like using open source, and there's certain open source projects that they contribute to, primarily in the e-learning space, I believe. That's how I kind of got my exposure to living and breathing a lot of the open source stuff, like really appreciating like what tooling there is out there and the communities that go along with it. As part of my time at Catalyst, I was in the same team as Danny Adair, who is one of the founders of PythonNZ, originally named NZPug. And he basically pulled me in to help do some video recording stuff at Kiwi PyCon X was the one. It was the one in Wellington. I think it was 2019, 2018, one of those years. I think it was before COVID. All that kind of blurs for me. And he gave me a free ticket, got a t-shirt, kind of said first taste is free. And so that was kind of my first exposure to more of the community side of Python. Fast forwarding a few years, I was kind of just looking around at what I was doing with my role and trying to kind of see what else was out there and wanting to make some connections in the industry. And so I started going to Python conferences again. I think this was back in 2023 and ended up going to Kiwi PyCon down in Invercargill, Waihopai. And that was an interesting experience. Let's just say I was kind of told about a week beforehand that they didn't have any AV. And my good friend Simon Merrick, he rang me up, was like, hey, we don't have any video recording for this kind of thing. We don't have any AV. Do you have any ideas? And I'm like, well, I've got some equipment. I could probably do a thing. It might not be very good, but I could probably record something. And I ended up asking around. I was still at Catalyst at the time. Got some advice to talk to Frank Keating. He's one of the organizers for CheckOn down in Christchurch. And we were like, oh, can we borrow some equipment? And he was like, why don't I just come down and I'll sponsor, but I'll just come down and record things. And so I ended up spending my time, I was meant to be attending a conference, being voluntold to basically help with AV. It was a bit of a mishmash. And so as I was kind of helping get people mic'd up and everything like that, I was kind of telling some people what to do for the production side of things. And I sort of left that conference thinking, I could probably run a conference, I could probably do that. And so leaving that, I decided to join NZPug at the time, now PythonNZ, and then apply for the committee. To give context of this, at Kiwi PyCon in Invercargill, they have a lightning talks thing, and I decided to teach everyone a sea shanty. Sea shanties is one of the things that I like doing. That's one of my hobbies. On Thursdays, I go see sea shanties at the pub, and it's a great thing. If you don't have a sea shanty club in your city or town, you should start one up. Recommended. I can send some links through on that one as well. So yeah, I ended up doing a sea shanty and a lot of people loved it. And so part of my bid, my election promise for joining the committee was that, well, if I'm elected, I will write a Python-based sea shanty and sing it at the next Kiwi PyCon. Now, I don't know if that was the reason why I was elected, but I was elected. Do we want to get into what happened?
Yes, so this is one of the reasons that I was hoping to get Chelsea on. So, Chelsea, thanks for giving that background. That's really great. Got involved in open source by meeting a friend at a conference who said, yeah, you should hang around. Started having more responsibilities because you kept voluntolding yourself that you should help out, and then went and helped out with various conferences. So this is a pretty great and standard story for how people get involved in open source. Chelsea, when you were elected as the chairperson of Python New Zealand, this was with full knowledge of something that had been going on for a few years, which was very, very intense and very difficult for the group. And it doesn't involve necessarily the conference Kiwi PyCon or the Python New Zealand community at large, but really involves leadership for this small group and what happens when that leadership breaks down in various ways. I'm alluding to an issue with the treasurer and with funds being basically moved around. Can you give me a bit of the backstory for what I'm talking about here and how?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Happens.
This is an interesting thing and maybe not a common story for people who first get involved in open source communities. I was elected onto the committee, and one of the first conversations I had was with the then president, Tom Eastman, where he was alluding to the fact that from previous conferences, we had quite a bit of a hole in our budget, and we still had a lot of people to pay. And it seemed like previous conferences were kind of more getting paid by the next conference rather than the profits of the conference at the time. And that seemed concerning. Now, he didn't really have any suspicions at the time of any malpractice, but I was kind of like, well, this kind of rings a bell to some other things that I've kind of come across in life before. And I suspect that maybe the treasurer has been doing some less than honest work. This is a very hard thing for, I think, a community to go through, because when you trust somebody and you have that relationship, it's very hard to see everything completely objectively. It's hard to assume the worst or assume what's actually happened. So I've joined this committee, and one of the first things that I hear is the fact that we might not get to exist as a society anymore, and we might not have a conference next year. So
Fun.
This could be the shortest stint of being on a committee that anyone's been on. And like we might be like winding up in a few months. That's an interesting thing. Like, how do you react to that? How do you go about that? Now, for me, I'm stubborn. Maybe stubborn's not the right word. I'm tenacious. I don't give in and give up easily. And I'm like, well, surely we can work around this. Now, going forward from that, we end up having our first committee meetings. We get access to the bank accounts because the bank accounts were closed for some reason. I'm not going to go into detail as to why and what the excuses were around that. But once we get those bank accounts, it was quite clear as to like what was going on. There were multiple purchases that were not associated with Python New Zealand or Kiwi PyCon, and these were adding up, and not a small amount of money.
Just to clarify, Python New Zealand is a registered charity. So this is a registered charity with a rolling board that gets elected every year. And what happened was that there was a bank account which had been closed. And when you finally, you knew something was a bit off. And when you got elected, you looked at the bank accounts and were like, oh, okay, a large amount of money is being allocated in directions that hasn't been given approval by the board.
Yeah. And so we have discussions about what we need to do. We talk to a lawyer. We get some legal advice on this, right? Of, can we continue to operate? Can we run another conference? And the reality that we were facing was the fact that we were insolvent. And the legal advice was that basically, if we took out a loan, if we continued to operate the society, that every committee member, every director effectively would be financially liable. And so this is a big risk, right? Like this is a big thing, a heavy thing to think about. And now maybe this is stupidity, but I was kind of like, well, like surely we can find a way. And the majority of the committee was on board with that. And I don't want to speak to anybody who wasn't, right? Because that's perfectly reasonable position. And not being a part of that is a perfectly reasonable thing. So yeah, we're faced with this hard decision. Now, one of the things that we need to do is also go to the police. So regardless of what we do, if we need to wind up, which kind of seems like the direction we'll probably have to go unless we could get some kind of financial backing, we basically only have the choice to wind up. But regardless, we have to go to the police. So I spent pretty much all of my summer holidays from like 2023, 2044, that summer holiday, just looking through spreadsheets. And there were a few of us who were doing that, just looking at every single line item and trying to discern, is this questionable or is it very clearly not related and like fraudulent? And it was a decent amount of money that was able to like confirm that was not for the society. So we at least had a case. We at least had that, but we still had to deal with the society. Now, this is where communities are really important. This is where these connections, these relationships, super critical. And Tom Eastman called up the president of Linux Australia and let him know of the situation with how big of a hole we've got and what we're facing. It's hard to express like how we felt with what they came back with, which is they effectively proposed two things. One is that they'll effectively sponsor Python New Zealand or NZ at the time and pay off our creditors with that sponsorship. So this wasn't a loan. This was just like a community sponsorship that they did. And then the second thing was they would have us run Kiwi PyCon, auspiced under Linux Australia, for the next 5 years, or until we returned the effective value of the sponsorship that they've given. This was an amazing thing to have proposed, right? Like we were faced with going insolvent, and here we are, like basically given this chance to still exist and to still run in the community. Like this, is the thing that we need to discuss and vote on and agree on as a committee, but like it was a no-brainer at this point. Like we are being offered a massive lifesaver. And so we did. We took that sponsorship from Linux Australia, and we've, for the past 2 years, been running Kiwi PyCon auspiced under Linux Australia. And you'll see them listed as our Phoenix sponsor, right? Rise from the ashes. They've breathed life back into the society, and words can't describe how grateful I am for what they did there. And I hope that investment in the community really pays off for them in the future. And I think it will. Actually, jumping forward in time up to the latest Linux Australia AGM, there were questions about like the state of Python New Zealand and like the sponsorship that was provided. And one of the members commented on Linux Australia has a profit, like it has money that they use for these kind of purposes. And if we want to know why we do things and why we have this money in a Linux Australia, well, it's for this kind of reason, right? It's to save these sort of societies. It's to give back to the community. Because without them, Python New Zealand would not exist now. And so as a reward, we got to run a conference.
So this is a really interesting story where one of the board members was behaving fraudulently. It was difficult to find. So one of the small print that they don't teach you when you say, yeah, I'm going to run for the board, is that the board is financially responsible for everything. So if you take out a $5 million loan and then you can't pay it, all the board members collectively have to pay back that money somehow, which is really, really intense. So when you sign up for open source leadership roles in any sort of charity, you're signing up for these obligations as well as having to wake up for, the various Zoom calls and horrible email chains that you have to deal with. And I don't often hear this talked about. I know of other charities elsewhere where there's been massive financial issues. I know of other places where there's been forks in communities that have led to destabilization, I guess, of projects as a whole, where one person takes the IP, another person takes something else. What's really interesting about a lot of these projects is you normally can't talk about them on stage. And you hear about them sort of in the side chat in the stairwell of the meetup, where it's like, oh man, did you hear what happened last year? It was really bad. So I'm really grateful that you came on to talk about this here. And it sounds like the main way that you were able to pull out of the issue was by reallocating trust into other communities that were able to help. In this case, Linux Australia swooped in. Linux Australia, by the way, is unrelated to the Linux Foundation. It's another open source community at large in Australia, which is large enough to have a large bank account, which was able to cover this not insignificant amount of money that needed to be covered. We had Kiwi PyCon last year. We've had it for the last 2 years. It seems to have worked pretty well. How did that all resolve? You went to the police, there was a court action and so on, and the money's being paid back, right, in time. And now are we still in the black? Are we in the red? Are we in some other color? What's happening?
So Python New Zealand, like in terms of the accounts, looks great. Very solvent. You won't believe how solvent we are. Court proceedings happened and everything was, turned out as we expected it to be. And that includes reparations, right? Over a decent period of time that will be taking place, right?
Thinking forward about how this might be useful for other people, I know that during this entire process, the government also instituted a new change, which says that every single charity had to rewrite their entire constitution, which was really, really annoying, which meant that as well as going over every single line item in the treasury, you also had to go over every line item in your instituted docs. Is this okay? Is this okay? Is this okay? Is this okay? What checks are in place now to ensure that this sort of thing doesn't happen in the future?
So we actually had it in our charter that 2 people were meant to have access to the bank account. And it's difficult for me to talk about it without throwing shade to a specific company, so I won't. But let's just say the enforcements that were expected to have weren't there. And there's certain processes and things that weren't followed from either side as well. But now what we do is we ensure that we've got a bank report every month for the committee to read. And additionally, we've actually tested the financial authority on those accounts to ensure that they are what we have set them to be, to ensure that the people who've got access to those accounts have access to those accounts and that you can't make transactions without like that dual signatory.
So you've gone down to McDonald's with your card and seen if it works or not without having another signatory?
I wouldn't say we've specifically done that thing, but in terms of general, more big transactions, we've at least tested where the functionality of those policies have actually been implemented properly. Like we've tested that. That's one side of it. We've also got Xero as well. So this was a thing that the previous treasurer argued against having because, we don't need it and everything like that. The thing is that if Xero was there, then it would have very clearly exposed the fraud in the first place.
What's Xero?
Xero is a financial, it's like an accounting SaaS application thingy.
Do you have an app which tracks where everything goes and how it's...
Yeah, basically doing money at a small, medium enterprise kind of thing. It does sound like an ad for it, so we could just say it's an application. Additionally, there's things like, in terms of when we're actually having committee members onboarded, requirements around like, is this person actually qualified? Or are they not disqualified from being a committee member in New Zealand, like, or on a board? These are the checks that we kind of need to have in place to protect ourselves.
This all sounds rather serious. And we started talking about sea shanties. Now we're talking about, well, we have checks to make sure that you can't fraudulently do stuff.
Yeah.
How do you hold space as an open source person for all the serious work and all of the light work? What revives you and makes this stuff possible for you?
I guess it's knowing why you're doing it. What is the motivator for doing it? And I guess for me, I want to keep the community alive and stubbornness as well. To be honest, like there's that sort of like spite. Spite is a strong motivator for me in a sense. Like we won't let this die. And so we'll put in all these like checks and balances in place to like ensure that this can't happen again. It's a motivator for me. That's not the exciting stuff, right? Like why would you sign up to do this? The reason is because you care. Looks good on your CV too, right? Like it's good experience. And it has counted towards my membership of the Institute of Directors as well. So like there are some personal things that like this is actually really good for. I'm not going to pretend like I get nothing out of this as a result, right? But I don't get money out of it. But what I get is exposure to this kind of work that you probably wouldn't get exposure to easily otherwise, right? It's in the not-for-profits and it's in the charities. It's in like these communities where there's a lot of work to be done because there aren't people who are paid to go do this thing. There's a lot of work. And so if you're thinking about signing up for one of these things, if you're thinking about joining Python New Zealand, being on the committee, if you're thinking about being on the board for another open source society, go do it.
We are running up on time. Briefly, I wanted to mention that while you were sort of figuring this out and putting in checks and balances of rewriting the Constitution and sort of mopping up the remains of the massive issue, because a lot of the work was done by the committee directly before you of figuring this out and going to the police and court orders and so on. You were also doing Python New Zealand or running Python New Zealand as the main person who runs it. And this is part of the hat of the chairperson of this organization, which is the same elsewhere, right? Python as an organization as a whole makes money from running the Python conference. And that means that the Python director also has to run a conference. This is why Eva, for instance, was running Python because they started out as the person who ran the conference. And then eventually it was just like, well, you should just run the foundation. So I've noticed that was really stressful and it took a lot of work, and your tenacity that you've mentioned a few times really did come into play. And it's like, it's amazing how much work went in, and it's awesome. And I really appreciated it. This year, you're doing things a bit different where we're also leaning on our Australian friends. We had Jack Skinner on the podcast recently talking about PyCon AU. What was it like making the decision not to run the next Kiwi PyCon this year, but just to run it on so-called the West Island? For those of you who haven't looked at a New Zealand map, there is no New Zealand West Island. That's just a joke saying it's Australia.
No, I'm definitely serious. It is definitely the West Island of New Zealand, I guess. We are taking over. But yeah, Kiwi PyCon West Island, I would say it was more of a decision that was something that we needed to just convince the rest of the committee of, more so for me, because I've just run a conference. And a big player in that as well is Simon Merrick, who was doing way more than I ever expected of him. But without him, like I would have completely exploded. And I was just kind of like, well, one, we sort of ran this conference at the end of the year. And so getting the next one up and running, like we're going to be straight into it. We also got the new elections and everything like that happening in February. So, we'd have to get the new committee on board. And by then, like, how much time would we really have leading up to a conference, right? Like how much would we have? Additionally, the financial situation in New Zealand's not really great at the moment. Like if you've seen anything economically, Australia is still stronger economically speaking than New Zealand, and New Zealand's in a bit of a hole at the moment. So I didn't have a lot of confidence that we'd break even on the next one. And so we need sponsors to run conferences. These things don't happen like for free. I mean, one, a lot of our time goes into it. But we need sponsors to actually run these things and make it affordable for attendees, or else like they don't happen. So if you work for a company, you don't have to sell it. Just get us a person. There's going to be a marketing budget. There's going to be a hiring budget, and maybe there's a community open source budget as well. Like just come talk to us. I mean, the decision is like fairly easy, right? Like in a sense. Yeah, I don't want to let the community down, but I'd rather run a good conference with people who aren't burnt out than one where people are just like doing it sort of out of obligation. And one of my goals this year is, we call it chairperson now. It used to be president, it's called chairperson. Chairperson's, it's just based on the new act and everything like that. It's just more in line with our constitution, is to find the people who are going to run the next one. Who are the next leaders in our community? So, that's a challenge. Who's going to run the thing after you? Because I can run the next one. I could. Do I need to? Probably not. I don't have to do it. And if I've got people who are keen to put their hand up and be like, hey, I'd actually really like to drive something here, put your hand up. Tell me. You don't have to be on the committee. Get in touch. We're keen to hear it. If you have passion, if you have ownership for something, that's not everything, but that's a huge piece of the puzzle, right? Of being able to do this kind of thing, is having that passion and ownership to get something across the line. Because it's a lot of work, but it's worth it.
That applies to open source projects in general, as well as open source community work. This has been kind of a triple threat of 3 different podcasts sort of covering various topics of what communities are like, or regional communities. And so, Chelsea, thanks. I think that's a great point to end on. Do get involved, everyone. You don't have to get involved with Python New Zealand. You can get involved with Python Latvia if you're listening in Latvia. That would be the best. If there even is a Python Latvia, I sure hope so. If not, maybe Python Baltic states. Chelsea, it's been great having you on. Do you have any final words besides those?
Like and subscribe.
All right. We'll get to that at the end. Before you leave, though, we have Spotlight. Spotlight is a part of the program where we talk about other projects, people, or things which are the best. Simon, Merrick, Danny Adair, and the rest of the awesome Python committee. Tom Eastman, not included in that. Let's talk about something else. Traditionally, the host goes first. So my Spotlight today will be the most recent book I read, which is The Book of Nights by Yves Maynard. If you really like nights, for some reason, I just really like them. I think it's because I grew up as a standard New England boy reading Lord of the Rings. Anyway, The Book of Nights is just an excellent short book. I really, really enjoy it. I've probably used it as my Spotlight before. Maybe I should use a different Spotlight. Chelsea, what's your Spotlight?
If you like video games, check out Outer Wilds, because it is one of the best video games ever made. But don't research it. Don't look it up. Outer Wilds, go play it. Go in blind.
Outer Wilds, like outer, O-U-T-E-R?
Yeah, Outer Wilds.
Outer Wilds. Sounds great. Thank you so much, Chelsea. And with that, listeners, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, talking about the difficult things of running open source communities, talking about, what happens when you suddenly owe thousands of dollars, and how do you solve that problem. If you like this podcast, there are various things you can do. First off, you can donate to continue this podcast going. In order to donate, you should go to opencollective.com/sustainoss. You can also reach out to me at richard@sustainoss.org with funding, sponsorship deals or whatever, or just any comments that you have, complaints, threats, whatever you like. You can like and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts are made and vended. You can follow us on Mastodon and LinkedIn and Bluesky. You can go to our discourse at discourse@sustainoss.org. You can find all the episodes and show notes at podcast@sustainoss.org. And again, you can donate. If you have ideas for podcasts that are specifically related to academic open source and or global open source ecosystems and infrastructures, I would actually love to hear them. I feel like I've been a bit too Aotearoa-centric, and it'd be really good to spread out back into the wider world of things. Again, that's richard@sustainoss.org. And of course, if you use Python, or you care about Python, or you just want to go to a fun conference, come to Brisbane in August for PyCon AU. You could also join Linux Australia, or join Python New Zealand, or just show up at any of the meetups in general, or go to your local open source awesome place. There are wider worlds out there beyond the Pythonosphere, but if there are, they're surely not as fun as Python conferences can be. Chelsea, thank you once again. Have a lovely day. And keep up the good work.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Richard.